podcast where I actually have like home studio setup envy. And I do this time because our guest, he's got an extensive hat collection in the background for our YouTube live streamers checking this out, and also a pretty nice microphone rig. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we welcome on for the first time the author of the book, The Temple Within, worshipful brother Raymond Foster. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm excited.
Nice. Now, you had kind of shared with me this home studio that you built here was actually part of your garage that you've renovated into what is the office that you do all of your work in now.
It is, and we had a podcast. We did over 250 episodes. My earlier writings, a lot of them were centered on police and military, so it was called American Heroes Radio, and we broadcast the stories of police, fire, and military personnel, men who'd written books, and so that gave me really extensive contact throughout the author world of cops, firefighters, and soldiers who've written, and that was so. I have this equipment, and we just stopped doing that quite a while ago, and went on to other ventures.
Nice. Well, writing became one of them, and we're going to get into your book, The Temple Within, which is now available on Amazon. If you're interested in getting a copy for yourself at any time during this episode, just click on the show links and bang, you'll find the link to get the book right there. It also has a great preview. He shares the entire introduction, which is where I'd like to start for our listener to learn a little bit more about you. You're the past master of San Dimas Lodge number 428 of the Grand Lodge of California. Tell us about your journey to those three knocks at the door of your lodge.
So, I'm over 50 years ago. I met a man who would become my father-in-law. So we're going back 55 years ago, and we would have long conversations. I didn't have a driver's license, so I probably had to be 14 or 15 when I'd go over and visit his daughter, and we would have long conversations about philosophy. He introduced me to Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and really the Greek philosophy starting back there, all the way through Dianetics. Those conversations would go. And I learned that he was a Mason. And so I thought that Masons were men who had all these very deep and meaningful conversations and thought about the important things of life. I might have been a little wrong about that, but so I would go years as an adult waiting to be found by the Masons. I would see their rings and I would see the men and I would see them go through it. I had no idea. My father became ill about 20 years ago. So I moved in with him up north in Mariposa, which is outside of Yosemite. And one day, my aunt, who was the worthy matron of the local Eastern Star, and my uncle was a Hiram Award winner in the lodge. My cousins were in that lodge, Mariposa number 24. My aunt says, your cousins can't ask you, but I can. Would you like to be a Mason? And I said, well, absolutely. I've been waiting for someone to ask. And she goes, well, they'll never ask you. Um, and so that begins my journey in Mariposa number 24, where ultimately I would be raised. And my father passes away. So I go back to home where my children and my family are, and I affiliate with San Dimas, which is the community I live in. And I will go through the line there. And I'm currently the officers coach for San Dimas Masonic Lodge. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I come to Freemasonry.
Awesome. Okay, so I was born in California. I grew up there for the first 9 years of my life. Then my family moved to wonderful Yuma, Arizona, and I spent the rest of my early years there. I think for anybody that's not on the West Coast, you may have heard of San Dimas from the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure movie, because that's the high school that they went to. Can you paint a little bit of what life is like in San Dimas, California?
Well, in addition to being the past master of the lodge, I'm the current chair of the Chamber of Commerce, the president of the Rotary Foundation, a past master of the Rotary Club, past scoutmaster of the community here. Community of 37,000 people. It's a bedroom community of Los Angeles County. But I'll tell you what we say is this is a place that has a city feel, but everybody still knows your name.
Mm.
And so it's kind of a big hometown. And so it's tucked away. Bill and Ted, as a matter of fact, if you go at Wikipedia and if you Google center of the universe, Wikipedia gives you San Dimas as one of the options because San Dimas and the Bill and Ted. But San Dimas is named after the patron saint of Saint Dismas, actually, and it's the patron saint of thieves. And what happens here, this is part of the Rancho San Jose land grant and many centuries ago, a man named Yorba owned it. And I live right outside of what's called Horse Thief Canyon. And he had a terrible problem with horse thieving and cattle rustling. And so he felt that if he named this area where I live after the patron saint of thieves, that might help with the problem. And I'm here to tell you it actually has, because in the 30 years I've lived here, I've never seen any horse thieving or cattle rustling. So it's worked. And so that's it. We actually will have a San Dimas has a day around the same time as the Festival of St. John. And so instead of doing the summer St. John, we'll often do the Feast of San Dimas here, and we'll do a degree, maybe, or a table lodge or something to celebrate that. This year, they did it I think it was a family camp out was the Feast of San Dimas this year. So
Nice. Okay.
very
Very
good.
cool. All right. So let's get to the book, The Temple Within. As I mentioned, it's available on Amazon. You can find the link to purchase it directly in the notes for this episode. In the introduction of the book, and this is where I'm like, I can't wait to talk to Raymond. I connected with you almost immediately, where you said the first couple of attempts of lodge education in your lodge were, quote, met with little success. Can you
Yeah.
take us back to that moment and how you chose that way to describe it?
Well, it was I hit a stone wall. There is a very small link off of the Grand Lodge of California website, and it will take you to another website that talks about an observant lodge. And one of the things it talks about is that Masonic education must be in every event, every degree, every stated meeting, everything you do. There should be some component of education to this. And I had felt for a long time that Masonry had promised me a mystical experience and had failed me miserably.
Mm.
And the degrees were great. I will tell you that my fellowcraft degree in the staircase lecture was delivered by a World War II fighter pilot, and as he gave that to me, I didn't know he'd memorized that. I thought he was talking to me. He was so good. But so there was something missing, and so I started too deep, and I started probably at the wrong angle. And the men, they nodded politely, and they got it just didn't get a reaction from people. But then it also got a very negative reaction in some ways, because I would say things that, if you explore the concepts, we have a phrase in Freemasonry: Masonic tradition informs us, right? You'll hear that or something like that. And what that means is everything that follows after that we made up. All right. So that's what it means, right? That means we made that part up. The rest of it, some men believe as history.
Hmm.
I would say that it's probably myth. And as myth, it's more important than history. History is a collection of fact. Myth is something that it conveys a profound truth through the ages. And so when I say something is mythical, I'm not I'm not being negative about it. It's not a pejorative statement. It's an uplifting statement. I'm telling you this is mythical. This is profoundly entered the human psyche and should be explored in some way. And some men would take that the wrong way. And I thought, well, what am I doing wrong here? And so I talked to brothers individually, and then I realized in some conversations that they all had a really good Western foundation in the Bible, particularly with the Bible stories. And so I thought, okay, the voice I need to use, I'm going to go back and explore these stories within the Bible more fully, and find the stories I can bring forward in a language that they will understand, and then begin to, as I build my credibility and build my story base, I will then begin to go lower and lower and shave lower into what we would call esoteric or hidden knowledge, to try to exemplify some concepts. So it was a lot of work,
Mm.
and then ultimately, I will get invited by another lodge to do. They asked me to come once a month to do a 2 hour presentation. I do lots of presentations. I do layman nights. I do the entered apprentice night, and I'll have men come in and we'll just talk about the lodge. So I do a lot of that, both Northern and Southern California. And so I had this thing where I was invited to do it for about 18 months. I decided to run it as a graduate level seminar. And what I did was I came in, and so the first 20 minutes while you're eating, I'm going to set the stage. And after that, we're going to have a conversation with the 25 or 30 men who'll show up. And they drove where they wanted to go. And those questions came up.
Mm.
So over time, over probably 6 or 7 years, I kept, I developed lesson plans, I kept notes, and I began to write these as essays. And as I began to look at them, I'm like, well, there's a book here. How do I pound this out? What is it going to look like? How do I structure it? And so that's where we get to where we are. Now we're something about a book. the book is like a child. Um, the moment you get the idea, that's conception, and that's the fun part.
Mm.
Everything else is like having a kid. It's work, and it's gonna be around for 2 decades, and it's gonna demand your attention, and so we're at the working part of the book.
Hmm. You know, it's interesting. You started out as just a newly raised master mason. Probably before that, as you were going through as an entered apprentice and then a fellow craft, just seeking light, asking, what we thought were obvious questions. And we would go to our mentor or other brothers in the lodge, and we thought it would be a simple answer. And they're like, oh, no, no, no. I don't know how many times you heard it like, well, you're not ready for that yet. Or here's the book you should go read if you really want to learn more about that. It's like, can't you just tell me? Why do I have to go to read this book? And then you kind of transition into more of an esoteric, as you put it, like you started understanding the deeper meanings and wanting to communicate that and share that with the common or average brother, to what I like, where you kind of pivoted to more exoteric, where the conversations and the discussions that would start happening with the men that were in the room, to now writing this book. And you're the second brother that I've talked to this season on the podcast where you basically took your programs or the speeches or the lectures that you would give and turn that into a book text. Can you kind of walk us through that process a little bit, like how you started connecting themes?
Well, in masonry, it's pretty easy because we have 3 degrees of masonry. So if you're going to talk about things, you have some natural, some breaks there, and some natural story arc too. Because as you know, in the degrees, we foreshadow and we go back and forth in what we're doing, and we refer to what we did and back and forth. So it has some really natural story arc in it. And when you're writing, you have to understand that it doesn't matter. I'm a good technical writer. It doesn't matter that it's a technical subject. There's still a story arc, and the
Mm,
story is whatever it is, and so you use all the same techniques that you would use as a fiction writer.
okay.
So then I thought to myself, well, okay, so 3 chapters. What about before the gate, before a man enters? And one of the things I wrote this book for, my wife read this and she goes, "This is the best book you've ever written." She goes, "A lot of it, as you say in the beginning, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but the things you did talk about, I want to know more about from my own." So
Mm,
I tell this is for not only the Mason but the curious seeker. So there's a whole first section is about is for the before the West Gate, and then the first, second, and third degree. Well, what comes after that? Well, that's living as a master mason, right? And so that's the fifth section, and these become sections, and sections get themselves. And so this book, though, is written really in what I call kind of magazine length essays, and each one has 3 questions for reflection at the end of it. And so what I was hoping to do is that you could take one of these essays. What I would love for men to do is for to go, everybody, let's read this essay and come back. And here's our 3 questions. Let's talk about this amongst ourselves.
love it. Love that.
And,
Yeah.
and so that what they know, here's another thing that they don't tell you about being a writer until you figure it out. 90% of the book is brought by the reader.
Hmm.
90% of the book is brought by the reader. It's the imagination of the reader that and the experiences and the context of the reader that they bring to what you pour. That's why when you go to lecture or you go there and you're having a conversation or a book signing or something like that, and people will come with some passage that is so important to them, and you're like, I don't even remember writing that, but okay, good for you, because that's what they brought. And
Right.
I wanted to give that at the end so now you could take that, and if you're angry at me, that's great because I've touched a nerve. And if you're like, I have no idea, that's even great too. So that's how it's structured.
I love that style. And it takes me back to, geez, before the pandemic, my lodge in upstate New York, uh, a couple of the brothers, we wanted to start a summer book reading club, and we had a rule, which this would fall into play here for the Temple Within, where we said, hey, we'll get books, but it has to be less than $20, and you have to be able to order it on Amazon, so we'd all get it at the same time. We'd have enough time to read it. The guy who suggested the book kind of played like the quarterback or the lead of the discussion, so you'd open it up and start having a conversation. Everybody had to bring one takeaway or idea or something that spoke to them from the book, and we would just have these open discussions. And one of the books that was really meaningful that I still use today, matter of fact, every time we obligate a new brother as an entered apprentice, I'm like, let me get this book shipped to your house, is Kirk McNulty's Working the Way of the Craftsman. His is a little different than yours, where he uses talks a lot about the symbolism and the working tools and some of the other parts of the degree, but they're very short chapters. And again, has questions at the end, which I love because I can't think of one past master, and you and I both have sat in the East, that aren't sitting there going, man, is there a program or something we could do tonight outside of Masonic etiquette, or why to never cross the master's carpet? And a book like yours is a perfect suggestion and like a new bright spark. And I love the idea of getting a group of guys to come into a room, because nobody wants to be in there for a boring business meeting, but everybody would love to be in there to be asked what they think about something or to share something that they've learned.
So the other thing is you'll find in this book is I there's a mix. Some of this stuff is not. I love the fact that we think of it as esoteric, and it is hidden only because we have not explored it.
Mhm.
And I'll give you an example. One of the ones that it's in the early part of the book. All I do is talk about the some of the words we use, like the word obligation. The word obligation is from the Latin obligato, which means the tie, a tie, things that the thing that ties. So a pair of handcuffs would be an obligado, or a pair of zip ties. The thing that ties, it is a noun. So the obligation is a noun, and it's what ties us to Freemasonry. Now, obligation. And if you think about what the obligation is at the first degree and what we say about it, oh, it makes a lot more sense now because we've simply explored the technical aspect of the word. And now I think that that engenders itself to another conversation. Okay, well, how is it tying me to Freemasonry? How does the obligation tie me? And I think that, exploring what these things mean word for word, and you can see here. So there's three bookshelves here. And um, if you, the one with the ship on it,
Oh
all of
yeah.
those are all masonry books, right? And so those are all that's my library that I've collected over time, and you can see that's my working library. That's why it's so ratty looking, right? Um, and men ask me,
Mine is
well,
right
what
back
book?
there.
There you go.
Yeah.
They ask me what book should I read for masonry.
Mm.
How do I explore masonry? Um, and again, I'm the temple within goes into this, but there's two things you need to do first before you begin to explore masonry, and that is comes back to how we know things. And they're called the two most important for us are participatory knowing and perspectival knowing. And participatory knowing is like what you do when you go to church and they have you stand and they have you kneel and they have you sing and they have you stand and they have you kneel and they have you pray. They're having you participate in the service so that you can know God. And so an example of participatory knowing. So going to lodge and participating in the degrees, even as a sideliner, is participatory knowing. You must participate in lodge. The second thing of this is, you know, every master, the lodge looks different from every seat you sit in.
Mhm.
Even if you're not even if you're not going through the line, and we really need to de-emphasize going through the line. That's not you don't need to go you do not need to be a contemplative mason through the line, but you can sit in the northeast corner, you can sit in the south, you could sit in the different places to get a different perspective on the degree. And last night we did a degree, and I thought that I wasn't going to have a part, but then the treasurer didn't show up, and I was to sit in because I thought I was going to sit on the sidelines. And what happens is when the degree starts, I get lost in it. I will, if I don't have a responsibility,
Mhm.
they'll start to say something, and I'll just sit and I'll get lost contemplating that piece as I sit there.
Yep.
And so I think exploration of masonry begins in the lodge itself.
Yep. It's like watching your favorite movie, and every time there's a new wrinkle or a line, or you didn't notice that, and you're like, how many times have I seen this? And the same goes for our degree work. Worshipful, I want to go back to the beginning of your journey because it was parallel, but also different than mine. So I'm the first man in my family who's ever made the knocks to go into a Masonic lodge. You had, let's say, a pretty good family history and a story that I've heard others say that have had uncles and aunts and grandfathers and fathers all involved in our ancient and gentle craft. And they're like, I was just waiting for someone to like recruit me or ask me. Like, your story that nobody said anything, like that is not uncommon. um but I wanted to get to that point where, because you and I both kind of came to the same door, and you may have had a little bit more insight as to what Masonic life was like, but maybe not so much about like what to expect with the degrees.
I had
And
no idea. I had no
okay,
idea. I was
so we
shocked.
totally on the same page there. And so when you walk into this room and you're hearing biblical passages, you're hearing lessons from the Bible, you can't see anything because of what's going on with the degree at that time. And you're like, I feel like I'm a little bit in church here. And then you start hearing these conversations about building your symbolic temple. I want to go back to how this all became the title of your book, The Temple Within, because that really spoke to me as a master mason.
Well, I spent 6 months. The book was done, and we didn't have a title for it. And I probably spent 6 months looking at it. And I actually ran it through a program, and I asked AI,
Hmm.
give me the 20 most common words. And it came up with a stupid question because it came up with the.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, what are the 20 most common verbs? What are the 20 most common nouns? I looked at that for weeks. And then I thought, okay, I want a 3-word title because the number three. And it's, the number three seems mystical, but it's actually very practical. And so there's a whole chapter by an essay on the number three, by the way, that I think is one of the best ones. It's my favorites. Um, and so I started looking, and then I realized, oh, I've been saying this, the temple within, in many different ways. And so I decided that's what I was going to do. And here's the way that I say it. Notice I won't begin many of my lectures with I'm not a master mason. I am not a master mason. I don't consider myself a master mason. Yes, I'm a past master of a lodge. I have a third degree. But in the ancient times, when you were a journeyman or a fellowcraft and you wanted to be a master, you presented your final piece of work called your master's piece. And if I'm working on myself, this is not my masterpiece. I don't want
Right.
I'd like
I hear you.
I'd like okay. So it's a constant ongoing thing about me and my personal development and personal journey that probably never ends. I don't think it ends. And so that made me more thinking about the temple within.
Mm.
There's a part in the middle of the first degree where we talk about the three lesser lights, right? And we tell the and you're telling the you're it's the first thing you tell the candidate, first thing you're facing him now, and you're telling him something, three great lights, the three lesser lights, and then you tell him what the master's job is.
Mhm.
And it's like, no, that's not what you're saying. What you're saying is that you are the master of the temple over which you have been called to preside, the master of your own temple. It's the first clue that's hidden away right there in plain sight that what we should be working on is ourselves.
Mhm. I often
And by the way,
compare. Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, it's okay.
No, I often compare Masonic ritual to Sun Tzu's The Art of War, which was the simplest, easiest text I've ever read, but also the most profound and deep, to where I would have to go back and, a few paragraphs makes up a chapter in that book and be like, what? This is so deep what he was saying with just a few amount of words. And it's interesting because without the proper Masonic education, kind of getting back to that point that you made initially, where if you have people asking these questions and you're telling them go back and read the ritual or go read this book, instead of just answering that simple thing like, when the master talks about this, what is he's talking about you being the master of your temple, touching on that whole theme of your book of kind of like the journey inward. And this has been a common theme, I think, for men who have been seeking Freemasonry since your grandfathers and the young guys that are walking in today. Is why do you think that? Why do you think in a world where we're so focused on the outside that there's this now group of men who are always going like, how can I improve me and be a better person today?
Well, I think it's that we intrinsically know that uh, the what's inside of us is all we have. Everything else is illusion outside of us. And that's the only thing we can change. We can physically, change ourselves. I often, tomorrow morning when you wake up, you will have a completely different stomach lining than you had today. The stomach lining is gone. You have a new one. Every 7 years, nearly, except for one gland, your body is completely cellular at a different level. We're constantly changing as human beings. Our job is to manage that change. And
Mm,
so I think we know that intuitively, and we're on the search for meaning because, Buddha tells us that meaning makes the suffering worth it, right?
Mm,
Because life is suffering. There's a lot of pain involved in this, and so finding meaning, and you can find meaning external, but I think we find meaning inside ourselves, the deeper meaning.
mm. You also get
Uh,
pretty deep with some of the references in your book. In the introduction, you talk about one of my favorite Masons as well, Manly P. Hall, and he has a very deep philosophical approach. I mean, the exact opposite of Sun Tzu, where Manly P. Hall's book are about as thick as when they used to print out the LA County yellow and white pages, and just as deep. But it's the whole concept of like the rough ashlar and trying to become the perfect ashlar. And we could spend another hour talking about this, but you do use this as kind of a guide in your book too. Can you expand on that message?
well, I picked Manly P. Hall for that reference in the introduction because there were several I was looking at for a variety of reasons. If you the further back you go, the different the languages. He's just current enough. He was alive when I was alive, although he was much older than I am. So language wise and experience wise, the later half of the 21st century, 20th century, he's going to have a good perspective. And number two is he even though he shied away, he was deep and he was also practical in many of the things. The Lost Keys of Masonry is a very practical book. I mean, you read that, and you'll read that and go, wow, that's really practical. It's not impractical. It's not esoteric. It's not hidden. And so that's why I chose him, because I thought that he really expressed what I wanted to express as far as modern interpretations of ancient ritual.
Mm,
That's why he's the one I select. Now there's 248 sources, I think, in the reference thing in the back, or 288 sources. So it's pretty deep as far as the book shifted in production and writing. Originally, I started to write. I tried to lead in every essay with a quote by a famous Mason because I thought that would be a cute thing to do,
mm,
and that turned out that was gimmicky. And so
mm.
that's one of the things when you do a rewrite, like, okay, that's gonna all get cut. That was a lot. I wasted a lot of time on that. And so that's one of the gimmicky things that gets cut. But what I did do is at the beginning of each one, there's a kind of a tagline that tells you what you're going to explore. So I'm hoping I'm setting it up so that you go into that next thing. And some of it's deep, some of it's pretty practical.
Mm.
Some of it's there. There's two things I did also. There's a there's two of them. One is I imagined myself as Mark Twain, and so I was going to give you Mark Twain's perspective on why he became a Mason. That's in part of the West Gate, before the West Gate. The other one is I did five presidents in a room talking about why they became president Masons and what it was reflected in their character. And there's some reasons that I did that. I wanted to remind men of who we're following, whose footsteps we're in. And I also wanted people who are not Masons to realize that, they're how important these people are.
Yep. Yeah. Some
We,
great
we
thinkers, some great truth seekers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we do need I we have this thing now and I hate it and I would like to punch it in the face. It's called the prospect manager because now we call people who want to become masons in contact, we call them prospects as if we're selling cars. I absolutely hate it. It just turns my stomach, prospect manager, and they give the prospect manager report at state meeting. And it's all well intentioned. I get it. I mean, I get that we don't do a very good job. We shouldn't be recruiting, but I got to tell you, we had a new sheriff's captain, and he was introduced at Lodge on Saturday. He stopped by one of the city council people stopped by for a food drive happening, and they asked to see the lodge. And the first thing I tell them is, I'm going to tell you something about Freemason. We're never going to ask you to be a member. Know that right up front. I'm never going to ask you to be a member. I'm not going to ask. And then I go into talking about Freemasonry.
Hmm.
I think we need to tell people that we're never going to ask you
Right.
because there's lots of people waiting to be. My neighbor I known for 30 years, and he knew I was a Mason. And one day I knew these people so well. I was in his kitchen doing dishes with his wife, and she says to me, Brian's waiting for you to ask him to be a Mason. And I go, oh, I got to go fix this. I go, hey, Brian, I'm never going to ask you to be a Mason. You got to ask me. He goes, well, I want to be a Mason. I go, done deal. So
I love the reverse psychology. That's awesome. So it's interesting. we don't get too many, or we haven't had too many 50-year members on the podcast. And that's honestly now my next goal as we get ready to start planning for season 6. I'm making a mental note here, get more 50-year members, because Freemasonry is kind of like life. The more time you put into it, this thing called wisdom you accumulate, and these people come to you and they ask you things because you've been here long enough. Tell us what you know. And what I found interesting about the Temple Within is that you're structured a lot around reflecting on the 3 degrees of Freemasonry. Do a great job of like not giving away a lot of the secrets. Just as you said, it's something as easy as your wife can pick it up, someone who has a common interest in Freemasonry. But through your 50 years of being a Master Mason, what are you kind of hoping that an entered apprentice, a fellow craft, a master mason of those 3 degrees, if they pick up this book as kind of a study guide as they're pursuing that light that they're being told they can seek in Freemasonry, what are you hoping that this book gives them?
Well, I'm not a 50-year Mason, by the way. I'm not close to that.
Oh, sorry.
No, no. I'll have to be. Holy Christ! I'll be 92. I was 40, and
Oh,
now I'm older, so I've been a Mason for 25 years. But I was 40 at the time. Now one of my sons is a Mason. One of my grandsons, I've obligated both of them. So that's good. I really like that. I get that question all the time. One of the questions that comes up: what should I do? I want to study Freemasonry. What should I do? And one of the things that in the book in the reference section, I have one reference to the King James Bible, but I actually have 170 different versions of the Bible that I use, interpretations or translations that I look at. Read the Bible, read the Bible, read the Bible. There's a reason that so much of our ritual comes from that book. Some of the men who wrote that book at the time probably were involved in the writing of our ritual. Certainly, they influenced it at the time. There's some historical evidence to suggest that very strongly. And that's why those lessons come out pretty clearly. And so you participate in lodge, read the Bible, and then, quite frankly, I think that if you want to become a true contemplative Mason, you've got to memorize or at least become extraordinarily familiar with the ritual so you can begin to see the inter-degree connections. We tell people we teach by degrees, but the guys aren't figuring it out yet.
mm.
That's I get this question: what should I do as a fellow crafter or as an entered apprentice? What should I do to do this? Keep going through the line, keep going through the degrees, but read the Bible first. And by the way, that was my, 50 years ago. That's my father-in-law. It's his advice to me, and he wasn't any kind of a religious guy. He said, "Well, okay, if you want to start philosophy, you got to read the Bible.
Mm.
Read the Bible first. Start there." Um,
Mm. It's
so
also interesting too. I'm not sure if in California you have the same part in the entered apprentice degree where you point to the volume of sacred text or the Holy Bible that's on the altar and say within these pages are found everything you need to know, which is, I'm just paraphrasing to be careful here. But it is interesting when you do get that Masonic Bible in New York State and you open it up, there's a little introduction that says, go here, 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 and here. And certain passages are called out to go read to get that further light.
well, let me give you an example of something, and this is there's a whole chapter in the Book of Ruth, because the Book of Ruth was actually the first thing I looked at in Maestry because of the California ritual. Again, I don't know New York ritual, but the Book of Ruth, we say the words, the Book of Ruth.
Yep.
So I went and read the Book of Ruth. I'm like, and what you realize then is that, wow, that's a pointer. That phrase, the Book of Ruth, is the most important part of that whole thing. It directs you to something. And if you read that story, right, and you read that story, you see what happens, it gives you a clue to look at something else. And I'll just say that, when Ruth and Naomi come back they come back to Israel and they are destitute. And when Ruth meets this very pious and wealthy farmer, and that she ultimately will marry him, and they will marry. His name is Boaz, and
Hmm.
Boaz and Ruth have a child named Obed, and he has a child named Jesse, and Jesse has a child named David. David has a name Solomon. So Boaz is a family name within the house of Solomon. Well, where's the name Jachin come from? Well, Jachin is a family name within the tribe of the Levites. And so Jachin, and so you've got the religious or the celestial, right? And you've got the physical or the royal line. Now you go to those pillars and look up and tell me what's on the top of them. One is celestial, and one. So you've been, oh, wait a minute, these things are all coming together. Why are they coming together now? And so there's lots of lessons, and this is where we jump off with teaching individuals. It depends on what a man needs to know. You might first talk about balance,
Mm,
balance in life, balancing, you might look at the square and compass and talk about and bring Manly P. Hall into a talk as above, so below, right? Because that's what this is also showing you. The rules in the celestial are the same as the rules in the physical. So there's all kinds of lessons that can come out of all this stuff.
mm. So this
And by
book,
the way, I find new ones. If somebody brings new ones to me, there's a symposium tomorrow night. I mean, I hope I learn more stuff.
yeah, and that's the spirit that I love about this, where you started out saying, "Hey, I was in this lodge where Masonic education wasn't lacking, but it was tough to come across." And I think that there's a lot of brothers where the saying is, a brother is only as good as the lodge that makes him or raises him. Where it can be tough when you don't have deep or even engaging Masonic education that's available. You see these guys kind of wash out of the craft because they just didn't get that experience, that mystical experience, kind of that you alluded to. So for that brother who's listening right now, or like, man, I wish I had somebody like Worshipful Raymond in my lodge that would sit next to me and talk with me and help me out. Like, what advice do you have for this new brother?
Well, I think that you have to keep asking these questions. If you're on this journey and you're asking the questions, that's what you've got to keep doing is asking the questions, and the mentor will come to you. I would here's okay. We call this magic. It's not magic. It's science.
Mm,
And we do this in the beginning with the ask, seek, knock in Matthew 22. We people when they interpret this ask, seek, knock thing, they interpret this as if it's dependent clauses. In other words, if I ask, it's going to come. If I seek, I'll find it. And if I knock, it'll be open. They're not depend. They're not independent clauses. They're dependent clauses, right? They're together. You have to. They're all together. Asking is, we verbalize before we think. And once we think, then we take actions based on those thoughts. And those actions create new words that we use, which create new thoughts, which create new. This is how we program our subconscious to find what we want. So
mm,
if you really are looking for a mentor, start talking about a mentor, start plugging your subconscious because your conscious mind is busy watching everything around you and your subconscious is watching for the one thing you've told it to look for. This is why we tell people that's why people get in bad relationships all the time, probably, is because that's what they're looking for. Hey, you're going to find the one knucklehead in the group because you've trained yourself to do that and you don't even know it.
hmm
So I would tell a man, use the first lesson we taught you, and that is talk about what you want, think about what you're going to, and then take an action to get a mentor. That may be as simple as asking the master. I'd like to, is there somebody here? My candidate's coach is great, but I really want something deeper. And so if you do that, just a couple of times, you will reprogram yourself to look for that thing subconsciously and it will come to you. Well, actually, it's already there. You just haven't seen it. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Totally
Now,
makes sense.
I've gotten real esoteric real quick on everybody, but sorry about that.
Well, no,
And it's
I'm
like,
in the same boat. I was that guy. I would have been a 5-year guy that left just because I kept asking and was not getting the answer in my lodge. So I went and started visiting other lodges, and lo and behold, I found all these other guys. Now, to your point, I always tell new brothers or brothers that are first getting started in the craft, like, don't go crazy like stalking these people like they're a rock star, and give them some space to breathe. And also don't be surprised if initially they don't tell you everything they know, because they don't deem you worthy, and no offense, they just don't deem you worthy enough to have a conversation with. They want to see who you are and what you're about, and there's this feeling out process that happens, and once that goes through, bang, it's like an almost sync connection. And it's amazing because I've seen this happen between young to old, old to young, and it doesn't matter. Age is not even in the equation. It's just two minds that were just kind of meant to meet up together and start syncing at that moment. And great friendships can sprout from that. So I totally get what you're saying.
also, I think that and this is in the book. It's in several places. If you figure out when you figure out the lost master's word, When you figure it out, you will never be able to explain it. 'Cause when you figure it out, and I'm not the only one that say this. Albert Pike said this. Albert Pike said it multiple times. If you figure this out, you're not going to ever be explained. The only thing you can do is I can help you find it, so that you won't be able to explain it either.
Mm,
Uh, so, and then in the one of the first chapters is about secrecy and why we have these things secret, right? And there's three reasons, but the one reason is sometimes you're not ready for the information. Sometimes it's not that you're not worthy, it's that it could be harmful for you to know to go to Z without going through the rest of the alphabet. This is a journey, and you don't start a journey by going to the end of it.
mm.
And so I think that don't get frustrated. It's a long, long journey.
Yep. Worshipful, I got one more question because I know you are one of those brothers I could easily talk to all night. And I love you for that. For the Mason who picks up the Temple Within, reads this, and now is like fired up again. They've been recharged. They're ready to start tackling that self improvement, that personal development that's, to our core, that speaks to us. What's the first action that you would recommend that they take the next morning when they wake up to start working on building that temple within?
So, well, if you, I have a mission. I have a mission, and my mission has been to return to the Masons of 100 years ago.
Mm,
The men who built the lodges that we sit in, the men who were those men. And the one thing that I think we've done that we do this is our lodge, we focus not on it being a center of our community, but it being a center of the community. So I think that what's important is if you get fired up about Freemasonry, is then to look for a way to express what it means within the lodge to you and out the lodge through service. And I say that, we have these wisdom, strength, and beauty are our pillars. We need to find the wisdom to realize that there are many pathways to participation. And so they're not always the officer's line. In fact, that's probably the least one. Find a committee, find a project, find something that you can become passionate about that connects you to activity within the lodge. And I think that's the best way to move forward with your Masonic journey and to share it with others.
love it. The Temple Within is the book. It's available on Amazon. If you're looking for the link to purchase it right now, you can click on the notes for this podcast episode and find it. The author, worshipful brother Raymond Foster. My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Craftsman Online Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
To that point,